The plasma cannons screamed overhead as dove behind a twisted piece of alien architecture. The defensive grid was falling apart, and he could hear the thunder of human breaking through the orbital blockade. After 3 years of this war, the sound should have been music to his ears. Instead, all he could think about was the massive golden creature limping through the rubble 50 meters away. Had been before the war started. He'd spent his early career studying Earth's most dangerous predators, understanding their behavior patterns and social structures. When humanity first encountered the Empire, he'd volunteered for the diplomatic corps, hopping to bridge the gap between species. That dream died when the decided humans were nothing more than useful slaves for their mining operations. Now he carried a pulse rifle instead of a data pad, but his scientific mind never stopped working, which was why he recognized the creature immediately, even though it was twice the size of any Earth lion and had scales mixed with its golden mane. This was a Terran lion, genetically modified and enhanced by biotechnology, the kind of exotic pet only the highest-ranking nobles could afford. The lion was bleeding from a deep gash across its flank, and its left rear leg dragged uselessly behind it. Worse, could see the neural control collar around its neck sparking intermittently. The collar was designed to keep the predator docile and obedient, but the damage was causing it to malfunction. Soon the lion would either go into a violent rage or the collar would overload completely, killing it with a massive electrical discharge. Pressed himself against the wall as another volley of plasma fire struck nearby. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see civilians fleeing their luxury towers. The wealthy district of Nexus Prime was supposed to be impregnable, but human engineering had found a way through their shields. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same technological superiority they had used to enslave his people was now crumbling before human ingenuity and determination. The lion stumbled and fell, its massive body hitting the crystalline pavement with a sound like breaking glass. Could see its chest rising and falling rapidly, the shallow breathing of an animal in shock. The neural collar sparked again, and the lion let out a sound that was part roar, part whimper. It was a sound it heard before, from wounded animals in pain and confusion. He should have kept moving. His squad was advancing toward the palace complex where intelligence suggested the Empress herself was hiding. This was the culmination of everything humanity had fought for, the chance to end the war by capturing the leadership. Every second he delayed put the mission at risk. But had seen too much death in this war. Too many humans dying in the slave mines, too many worlds burned from orbit, too many friends who would never see Earth again. The idea of watching another innocent creature die while he stood by and did nothing felt like surrendering the last piece of his humanity. He checked his tactical display. His squad was 3 blocks ahead, moving through the abandoned merchant quarter. He had maybe 10 minutes before they would notice he was missing and come looking for him. 10 minutes to either save the lion or confirm it was beyond help. Sprinted across the open space, keeping low as debris fell around him. The lion's eyes tracked his movement, but the massive head didn't lift. Up close, could see the extent of the damage. The gash on its flank went deep, probably from shrapnel during the orbital bombardment. The neural collar was definitely malfunctioning, sending random electrical pulses through the lion's nervous system. He knelt beside the creature's head, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. The lion was still a predator, enhanced or not, and pain made any animal unpredictable. Had dealt with wounded big cats before, though never one that had been genetically modified by an alien empire. The lion's eyes were a deep amber color, far more intelligent than any natural predator. They didn't just enhance their pets physically, they increased their cognitive abilities as well. This creature understood its situation in a way that probably made its suffering even worse. Reached into his field kit and pulled out a medical scanner. The device had been designed for human physiology, but he'd modified it during his early diplomatic work to analyze alien biological systems. The readings confirmed what he'd suspected. The lion was dying, not just from its wounds, but from the collar's malfunction. The constant electrical interference was disrupting its enhanced nervous system. He could try to remove the collar, but that came with its own risks. The device was designed with anti-tampering measures. If he triggered the wrong response, it would deliver a fatal shock to both the lion and anyone touching it. On the other hand, leaving it in place guaranteed the lion would be dead within the hour. Looked into those intelligent amber eyes and made his decision. He'd spent too many years studying animal behavior not to recognize a creature asking for help. The lion couldn't speak, but its gaze held the same desperate trust had seen in wounded animals throughout his career. He pulled out his and began examining the collar's locking mechanism. Technology was elegant but complex, designed more for aesthetic appeal than practical maintenance. The neural control systems were integrated with decorative elements that served no functional purpose beyond displaying the owner's wealth. As worked, he found himself talking to the lion in the same soft tone he'd used with frightened animals back on Earth. It was probably pointless, given the language barrier, but the creature's breathing seemed to slow as he spoke. Maybe the tone conveyed something universal about non-threatening intentions. The first lock disengaged with a soft click and felt a moment of relief. The collar had 5 separate locking mechanisms, each one more complex than the last. He was making progress, but time was running out. His tactical display showed his squad had stopped moving, probably setting up for their final assault on the palace. Soon they would realize he was missing. The second lock proved more stubborn. Had to access the collar's internal diagnostics, navigating through layers of code that seemed designed more to confuse than protect. It was like trying to perform surgery while reading instructions in a foreign language. A massive explosion echoed through the district as human forces breached another defensive position. The shockwave rattled the buildings around them and had to steady himself against the lion's massive form. The creature's fur was softer than he'd expected, despite the scales mixed throughout. Under different circumstances, he might have spent hours studying the unique hybrid biology they had created. The third lock opened just as heard the distinctive whine of hover vehicles approaching. He looked up to see 3 sleek craft moving through the ruins, their scanning arrays sweeping back and forth. They were probably evacuating high-value civilians from the combat zone, but he couldn't take any chances. Pressed himself against the lion's flank, hopping the creature's bulk would hide him from aerial observation. The hover vehicles passed overhead without stopping, but their presence reminded him how exposed they were. The abandoned luxury district wouldn't stay empty forever. The fourth lock was the most complex yet, requiring to interface directly with the collar's AI system. The artificial intelligence was primitive by human standards, but still sophisticated enough to recognize an unauthorized access attempt. Had to convince it that he was a legitimate technician performing routine maintenance. Fortunately, arrogance worked in his favor. Their security systems were designed to keep out other, not humans. They'd never imagined that a primitive species could understand their technology well enough to hack it. Was able to present his credentials as a maintenance worker, using protocols he'd learned during his diplomatic mission years ago. The AI accepted his authorization, and the fourth lock disengaged. One more to go, but could already see the difference. The electrical interference was decreasing, and the lion's breathing had become more regular. The creature was still badly wounded, but at least it wasn't being slowly electrocuted anymore. The final lock was purely mechanical, a design to prevent removal even if all the electronic systems failed. Had to physically manipulate a series of sliding panels while maintaining pressure on 3 separate contact points. It was clearly designed to require multiple hands, probably belonging to whoever owned the lion. Managed it by using his knees to maintain pressure on 2 of the contact points, while his hands worked the sliding panels. It was awkward and uncomfortable, but finally he heard the satisfying click of the last lock disengaging. The collar fell away from the lion's neck, sparking once more before going dark. Carefully moved it aside, knotting the complex neural interface points that had been connected to the creature's spine. They had essentially turned the lion into a living puppet, controlled by whoever held the command device. With the collar removed, the change in the lion was immediate. Its eyes became more alert, and it lifted its massive head to look directly at. For a moment, human and enhanced lion studied each other in silence. Could see intelligence in those amber eyes, but also something else. Gratitude, maybe, or at least recognition that he'd helped. The lion tried to stand, but its injured leg collapsed under its weight. Quickly examined the wound, using his scanner to assess the damage. The leg wasn't broken, but there was significant muscle and nerve damage. The lion could probably walk with support, but it would need proper medical treatment to recover fully. His comm unit crackled to life, and he heard his squad leader's voice cutting through the static. They were moving toward the palace, and they wanted to know his position, looked at the wounded lion, then at his tactical display. He could catch up with his squad in 15 minutes if he left now, but the lion needed help, and there was no way it could keep up with a human military unit. He made his second difficult decision of the day. Activated his medical beacon, a signal that would guide automated medical units to his location. The signal would also reveal his position to any forces in the area, but it was the lion's only chance for proper treatment. Then did something that surprised even him. He reached out and gently touched the lion's massive head, the same gesture he'd used with countless animals over the years. The lion's eyes closed briefly and could swear he heard the faintest rumble of a purr. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted the moment. Grabbed his rifle and took cover behind a nearby pillar, expecting to see patrol units. Instead, he saw human medical vehicles responding to his beacon. The war had progressed faster than he'd realized, and human forces now controlled this entire district. As the medics approached, explained the situation. Most of them looked at him like he'd lost his mind, risking his life to save an alien's pet. But the senior medic, a grizzled veteran named, just nodded and began examining the lion's wounds. Had been a veterinarian before the war, and he approached the enhanced lion with the same professional calm remembered from his own early career. Within minutes, he'd stabilized the creature's condition and prepared it for transport to a field hospital. As the medical team loaded the lion onto their transport, felt a hand on his shoulder. His squad leader, Sergeant Williams, had arrived with the rest of the unit. Expected a reprimand for abandoning his mission, but Williams just looked from to the lion and shook his head. Williams had known since before the war, back when they'd both been part of the diplomatic mission to space. He understood why couldn't walk away from a wounded animal, even in the middle of a war zone. The palace assault was already over by the time Reed rejoined his squad. Human forces had captured the entire leadership, including Empress herself. The war that had consumed 3 years of human lives was finally ending, and had spent the crucial moment saving an abandoned pet. As they marched through the defeated city, couldn't help but think about the lion. The creature had been enhanced, modified, controlled, and ultimately abandoned by its owners. In some ways, its story mirrored humanity's own struggle against the Empire. Both had been shaped by technology, both had suffered under control, and both had finally found freedom. The difference was that humans had won their freedom through war and sacrifice. The lion had found its freedom through the compassion of a single human soldier who couldn't bear to watch another innocent creature die. Wondered if that difference said something important about what it meant to be human, even in the darkest moments of an interstellar war. 3 days later, as he filed his after-action report, learned that the lion had survived its surgery and was recovering well. The medical team had removed all traces of control technology and were working to understand the creature's enhanced biology. It would never be just a normal lion again, but it would be free to choose its own path. Smiled as he finished his report. In a war defined by technological superiority and strategic objectives, sometimes the most important victories came from simple acts of compassion. He'd helped save one alien's abandoned pet, and somehow that felt more significant than capturing an entire enemy empire. 6 months after the fall of Nexus Prime, stood in the observation deck of Research Station Harmony, watching the golden lion pace through its spacious enclosure. The creature had grown even larger since its recovery, the genetic modifications continuing to express themselves in ways that surprised the xenobiology team daily. What surprised most, though, was how the lion always stopped packing when it noticed him watching. The war was officially over, but the aftermath had created complexities no one had anticipated. The Empire had surrendered unconditionally, but governing a dozen star systems filled with alien civilians presented challenges that military strategy had never prepared humanity for. Had been reassigned from combat duty to the newly formed Relations Council, tasked with managing the transition from war to whatever came next. Research Station Harmony orbited the former imperial capital, serving as both a symbol of human victory and a practical base for studying technology. The lion, designated Subject Alpha by the research team, but still called Leo by, had become an unexpected focal point for debates about the future of human relations. Dr. Sarah, the station's chief, joined at the observation window. She carried a data pad filled with the latest analysis of Leo's genetic structure, though suspected she was more interested in discussing the political implications of their discoveries. "The modifications run deeper than we initially thought," Sarah said, pulling up a holographic display of Leo's enhanced DNA. They didn't just make him bigger and stronger. They increased his cognitive abilities to near-sentient levels, enhanced his sensory perception, and extended his to potentially centuries instead of decades. Nodded, watching Leo investigate a new environmental enrichment device the team had installed. The lion's problem-solving abilities were remarkable, often finding solutions to challenges that the research team hadn't anticipated. More disturbing was Leo's apparent understanding of his own situation. The creature seemed to recognize that it was being studied, and sometimes caught it studying them right back. "There's something else," Sarah continued, lowering her voice. "We found communication implants embedded in his neural tissue that gave him the ability to understand their language, maybe even to communicate in limited ways. The technology is damaged, probably from the collar malfunction, but it's still partially functional." This was new information, and felt a chill as he considered the implications. If Leo could understand language, then he'd been aware of everything that happened during his captivity. The creature had understood his abandonment, understood the pain of the malfunctioning collar, and understood that had chosen to save him. "Can the implants be repaired?" asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Theoretically, yes, but that raises ethical questions about consent and cognitive enhancement that make our philosophers uncomfortable. Do we have the right to restore abilities that might fundamentally change the nature of the creature? And if we do, what responsibilities does that create for us?" Before could respond, an alarm chimed through the station's communication system. The sound meant visitors were arriving, and given the current political situation, that usually meant trouble. And Sarah made their way to the command center, where they found the station commander, Admiral Torres, preparing for what looked like a formal diplomatic reception. "We're receiving a delegation from the provisional government," Torres explained as his staff hurried to prepare the docking bay. "They're requesting permission to board and discuss matters of mutual concern. Given our current mandate to foster cooperation, I've agreed to hear them out." Exchanged glances with Sarah. The provisional government had been established by moderate nobles who had opposed the war and worked with human forces during the final assault. They were attempting to maintain some form of self-governance while acknowledging human military superiority, but their position was precarious. The delegation consisted of three, led by a young female whose elegant bearing and expensive clothing marked her as high nobility. Recognized the type from his diplomatic training members of the imperial court, who had survived the war by carefully switching sides at the right moment. What he didn't expect was her reaction when Admiral Torres mentioned that the station housed a research facility studying biotechnology. The young noble's composure cracked visibly, and she asked with barely controlled emotion if they had recovered any enhanced creatures from the imperial palace. "We are caring for one such creature," Torres replied diplomatically. "A genetically modified Terran lion that was apparently abandoned during the evacuation." The noble's face went completely pale. She whispered something in her own language that recognized as a prayer or oath, then requested permission to see the creature immediately. Her desperation was so obvious that found himself volunteering to escort her to the observation deck. As they walked through the station's corridors, the woman introduced herself as Princess Lyra, daughter of Duke and former ward of the imperial court. She had been studying xenobiology herself before the war, focusing on the ethical implications of genetic enhancement. She spoke standard with only a slight accent, suggesting extensive contact with human academic institutions. "The lion you rescued," she said quietly as they approached the observation deck. "Was he golden in color, approximately 3 meters in length, with scales mixed throughout his mane?" Confirmed the description, and Princess Lyra stopped walking entirely. She leaned against the corridor wall, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Recognized the signs of an anxiety attack and guided her to a nearby bench. "His name is," she said when she had recovered enough to speak. "He was my companion for 12 years since I was a child. My father commissioned his creation from the finest biogenetic artists in the Empire, using DNA samples from the legendary lions of Earth's Serengeti Preserve." Felt his understanding of the situation shift dramatically. This wasn't just about studying an abandoned alien pet. This was about reuniting a young woman with what amounted to her oldest friend, a creature she'd grown up with and probably loved. The imperial court demanded that all noble families contribute their most valuable possessions to the war effort. Lyra continued. My father gave them agricultural equipment and mining platforms, but the Empress herself demanded, claiming that a creature of such beauty and intelligence would serve as the perfect symbol of imperial power. They continued toward the observation deck, Lyra explaining how she'd been forced to watch her companion become a living decoration in the imperial palace. The neural control collar had been installed to ensure remained docile during public appearances, turning him into a beautiful but mindless trophy. When the palace fell, the Empress ordered all the exotic animals destroyed rather than let them fall into human hands, Lyra said, her voice tight with old pain. I thought it died along with all the others, learning that he survived, that someone saved him. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. They reached the observation deck and watched Lyra's face as she saw for the first time in 2 years. The princess pressed her hands against the transparent barrier, tears streaming down her face as she spoke his name in. The lion's reaction was immediate and dramatic. He bounded across the enclosure with surprising grace for such a massive creature, pressing his own body against the barrier from the other side. Had seen touching reunions before, but this was different. The bond between Lyra and was unlike anything in his experience with either humans or animals. They communicated through gesture and expression in ways that suggested years of shared understanding. Seemed to be trying to comfort Lyra even as she comforted him. The communication implants, said suddenly, remembering Sarah's discovery. They're not just for understanding language, are they? Lyra nodded, not taking her eyes off. They were calibrated specifically to my neural patterns. We could share emotions, memories, even simple thoughts. It was considered the ultimate expression of the bond between a noble and their companion creature. This revelation changed everything thought he understood about genetic enhancement and animal consciousness. Wasn't just an intelligent animal. He was half of a bonded pair, separated from his partner and forced into servitude. No wonder he'd seemed so aware during his recovery. He'd been mourning not just his captivity, but the loss of his closest relationship. Doctor arrived with the rest of the research team, alerted by the unusual readings coming from the enclosure. Was displaying behaviors they'd never seen before, complex vocalizations and movements that seemed almost like language. The biometric monitors showed elevated activity in the parts of his brain associated with the communication implants. Can we restore the full neural link? Asked, though he suspected the answer was complicated. The technology exists, Sarah confirmed, but it would require cooperation from both parties and extensive modification of the existing implants. It's essentially a form of cybernetic telepathy, something far beyond current human capabilities. Admiral Torres joined them, having been briefed on the situation by his staff. The political implications were staggering. If humanity could successfully reunite Princess Lyra with her enhanced companion, it would demonstrate both compassion and technological sophistication to the population. On the other hand, it would also require trusting a former imperial noble with access to advanced alien technology. What are you asking of us, Princess? Torres inquired diplomatically. Lyra looked at, who seemed to understand the conversation despite the language barrier. I want to restore our bond and take responsibility for his care. I know you have no reason to trust me, given the history between our peoples, but is suffering without our connection, and I believe I can help him find peace. Found himself thinking about the moment he decided to save in the first place. He'd acted out of compassion, not strategic calculation, and it had led to this unexpected opportunity for genuine reconciliation between former enemies. There would have to be conditions, Torres said slowly. Extensive monitoring, regular psychological evaluations, and agreement to share any insights gained about the enhancement technology. I accept any conditions you require, Lyra replied without hesitation. I just want my friend back. The next several hours were filled with technical discussions about neural implant modification and political debates about the precedent this would set for human relations. Found himself advocating for the reunion, drawing on his xenobiology background to argue that separating bonded pairs caused unnecessary psychological trauma. The decision ultimately came down to Admiral Torres, who had the authority to approve or deny the princess's request. Watched the man wrestle with competing concerns about security, diplomacy, and simple human decency. We'll attempt the procedure, Torres announced finally. but it will be conducted under strict medical supervision, with safeguards to prevent any misuse of the technology. The actual restoration process took 2 days of careful surgical work, performed by a team combining human surgeons and observed from the medical bay, watching as layers of damaged neural interfaces were carefully repaired and recalibrated. Lyra remained conscious throughout the procedure, providing feedback as the technicians restored the delicate mental pathways that had connected her to. When they finally activated the restored link, the change was immediate and profound. Relaxed completely for the first time since had found him, his entire body posture shifting from wariness to contentment. Lyra smiled with tears in her eyes, speaking to her companion in a mixture of verbal and what realized must be direct mental communication. "How does it feel?" asked, curious about the experience from a scientific perspective. "Like being whole again," Lyra replied simply. "I had forgotten how empty the world felt without sharing it with someone who truly understands." Over the following weeks, watched the remarkable partnership between Princess and Lion develop into something unprecedented. Lyra's presence transformed not just but the entire research station. She worked with the human scientists, translating enhanced perceptions into data that advanced their understanding of animal consciousness and genetic modification. More importantly, she served as a bridge between human and perspectives on the ethical use of biotechnology. Her insights helped the research team understand the cultural context behind genetic enhancement, moving beyond simple technical analysis to explore the philosophical implications of creating sentient companions. Realized that saving had accomplished something military victory alone never could. It had created a genuine partnership between former enemies based on shared compassion and mutual respect. The war had ended with human dominance, but peace would require this kind of understanding between species. As he prepared his latest report for the Relations Council, reflected on how a single act of compassion had grown into something much larger. He'd saved an abandoned pet, but in doing so had helped create a foundation for lasting cooperation between humans and the bond between Lyra and had become a symbol of what was possible when different species chose trust over fear, understanding over prejudice. It was exactly the kind of hope the galaxy needed as it recovered from 3 years of interstellar war. 2 years after the neural link restoration, found himself standing in the gardens of New Geneva, Earth's diplomatic complex, watching teach human children how to identify different plant species by scent. The massive lion moved with gentle precision among the young students, his enhanced senses allowing him to detect subtleties that even trained botanists missed. Princess Lyra knelt beside a group of fascinated 6-year-olds, explaining through their shared neural link how could distinguish between Earth roses and their cousins. The children hung on every word, completely unafraid of the enormous predator who had become one of their favorite teachers. The scene would have been impossible to imagine during the war, but it had become routine in the 2 years since the initiative had been established. What started as a simple reunion between princess and companion had evolved into the galaxy's most successful cooperation program. Served as the initiative's director, overseeing research projects that spanned 3 star systems and involved scientists from 12 different worlds. The partnership between Lyra and had proven that the barriers between species were often more psychological than practical, and their success had inspired similar programs throughout former space. "Doctor, we have visitors requesting access to the facility," announced his assistant, Lieutenant Sarah Torres, daughter of the admiral who had first approved the reunion. Sarah had grown up hearing stories about the rescued lion and had requested assignment to the initiative as soon as she graduated from the diplomatic corps. Checked his schedule, nodding that he wasn't expecting any official delegations. The initiative had become famous throughout human space, attracting visitors from research institutions, government agencies, and sometimes celebrity tourists who wanted to see the telepathic alien princess in person. "Who's requesting access?" asked, though he suspected the answer would be complicated. In his experience, unexpected visitors usually meant either very good news or very bad problems. "A human transport carrying refugees from the outer colonies," Sarah replied, consulting her data pad. "They're claiming to have enhanced creatures aboard who need immediate medical attention. The ship's captain says the passengers insisted on coming here specifically." Felt a familiar chill of recognition. The outer colonies had been the site of several illegal genetic modification experiments during the war, some conducted by human black market scientists using stolen technology. The results had often been tragic, creating enhanced animals and even humans who suffered from severe psychological and physical problems. He made his way to the landing platform, where Lyra and were already waiting. Their bond had grown stronger over time, to the point where seemed to sense emotional state through Lyra's perceptions. The lion's alert posture told that whatever was arriving would be significant. The refugee transport was a converted cargo hauler, its hull by weapons fire and emergency modifications. As the passenger ramp lowered, saw a mix of human and civilians, all carrying the subdued demeanor of people who had experienced trauma. What caught his attention were the large cargo containers being carefully unloaded by the ship's crew. A middle-aged woman approached the reception committee, her bearing suggesting military background despite her civilian clothes. She introduced herself as Doctor, formerly of the Colonial Medical Corps, now running an underground rescue operation for victims of illegal genetic enhancement. "We've been following the success of your initiative for the past year," Doctor explained. "When we learned about Princess Lyra's techniques for healing neural link damage, we knew we had to bring these cases directly to your attention." She gestured toward the cargo containers, which now realized weren't containers at all but specialized medical transport units. Through the transparent sections, he could see movement inside, though the shapes were difficult to identify. "Enhanced wolves," Doctor continued, "created by a human research facility that was trying to replicate companion bonding technology. The experiments were abandoned when the facility was destroyed in a pirate raid, leaving the subjects without proper neural integration or psychological support." Exchanged glances with Lyra, who was already moving toward the transport units at her side. The princess had become expert at diagnosing problems with enhanced neural systems, and her expression grew increasingly troubled as she examined each unit. "How many subjects?" Lyra asked, though could see she was already counting in her head. 12 wolves, all siblings from the same genetic modification process. They were bonded to a group of human researchers who died in the attack. The surviving pack has been deteriorating psychologically ever since, and we don't have the expertise to help them. Moved between the transport units, making soft vocalizations that had learned indicated deep concern. The lion's enhanced senses could probably detect stress pheromones and other chemical signals that revealed the wolves' emotional state. "They're in severe psychological distress," Lyra confirmed after examining the neural interface readings on each unit. The bonding process was incomplete when their human partners died, leaving them in a state of permanent emotional trauma. Without proper resolution, they'll continue deteriorating until their enhanced nervous systems shut down entirely. This was worse than had feared. The wolves represented exactly the kind of genetic modification disaster that gave the entire enhancement program a bad reputation. If they couldn't be helped, it would provide ammunition for critics who argued that bonding was inherently dangerous. On the other hand, successfully treating the wolves would demonstrate that the initiative represented more than just feel-good publicity. It would prove that the techniques developed through Lyra and's partnership could address real problems faced by enhanced creatures throughout the galaxy. "What do you need from us?" asked, though he already knew the answer would strain their resources. "Temporary housing for the wolves while we attempt neural link reconstruction," Lyra replied. "But this isn't like my reunion with. These creatures were improperly bonded to begin with, and their partners are dead. We'll need to essentially rebuild their entire psychological framework." The logistics alone would be challenging. The initiative's facilities had been designed for research and education, not for treating traumatized, enhanced animals. They would need specialized medical equipment, additional security measures, and probably additional staff with expertise in animal psychology. More problematic was the political dimension. The wolves were technically refugees from a human colony that had been conducting illegal genetic experiments. Accepting them would mean acknowledging that humans had been pursuing the same enhancement technologies that the Empire had used to control their pet creatures. Made the decision the same way he decided to save 2 years earlier. Sometimes doing the right thing mattered more than political convenience. "We'll accept the wolves," he announced. Lieutenant Torres will coordinate temporary housing arrangements while Princess Lyra and I develop a treatment protocol. The next several hours were filled with frantic activity as the initiative's staff prepared to accommodate 12 traumatized enhanced wolves. The medical team worked to stabilize the pack's immediate physical needs, while Lyra and developed techniques for addressing their psychological trauma. Found himself coordinating with Doctor and her team to understand exactly what had been done to the wolves. The human researchers had used stolen bonding technology, but had failed to understand the cultural and psychological framework that made such bonds successful. They treated the bonding process like a simple technological implantation, Doctor explained as they reviewed the research notes she'd recovered. They didn't understand that the neural links require emotional preparation, cultural context, and ongoing psychological support. Lyra nodded grimly as she read through the experimental protocols. The researchers bonded the wolves to themselves without understanding that they were creating permanent emotional dependencies. When the researchers died, the wolves lost not just their partners but their entire psychological foundation. The wolves themselves were beautiful creatures, larger than natural wolves and enhanced with the same golden coloring that marked many genetic modifications. But their behavior was heartbreaking to observe. They moved listlessly through their temporary enclosures, occasionally howling with a sound that conveyed pure anguish. Spent hours near their enclosures, apparently trying to communicate with them through scent and vocalization. Had learned to trust the lion's instincts about other enhanced creatures, and patient attention suggested that the wolves could be reached despite their trauma. The key will be creating new emotional anchors for them, Lyra explained during their first treatment planning session. They can't bond with deceased humans, but they might be able to form pack relationships with each other if we can rebuild their capacity for social connection. The treatment protocol they developed was unlike anything attempted before. Instead of trying to replace the wolves' lost human bonds, they would work to restore the creature's natural pack instincts while maintaining their enhanced cognitive abilities. Lyra would use her experience with neural link technology to repair the damaged interfaces, while would serve as a model for how enhanced creatures could maintain their psychological health. The process would require months of careful work, with no guarantee of success. The first breakthrough came 3 weeks into treatment, when one of the younger wolves began responding to patient overtures. The lion had spent hours each day simply being present near the wolf enclosures, demonstrating calm and stability through his behavior. Watched through the observation windows as the young wolf cautiously approached, sniffing the larger predator with obvious curiosity. For the first time since arriving, the wolf's tail moved in something resembling a wag rather than the nervous twitching that had characterized all their movements. "He's remembering how to be social," Lyra observed, monitoring the neural activity through her own enhanced interface. "Is showing him that enhanced creatures can form relationships without the terror of abandonment." Over the following weeks, more wolves began emerging from their emotional isolation. They started interacting with each other, rebuilding the pack dynamics that their enhancement process had disrupted. Lyra worked carefully to repair their neural interfaces, removing the damage caused by incomplete bonding while preserving their enhanced intelligence. The process wasn't without setbacks. Some wolves regressed when faced with reminders of their lost human partners, and others struggled with the complexity of their enhanced cognitive abilities. But gradually, a new kind of pack emerged, one that combined natural wolf instincts with the intellectual capabilities their genetic modification had provided. Documented everything, knowing that the wolf rehabilitation project would either validate the initiative's approach or provide critics with evidence of its limitations. The wolves represented the dark side of genetic enhancement, the consequences of treating consciousness as a commodity rather than a responsibility. But they also represented hope. If traumatized, enhanced creatures could be healed and integrated into healthy social structures, then perhaps the galaxy could move beyond the exploitation that had characterized both human and approaches to genetic modification. 6 months after their arrival, the wolves had formed a stable pack structure with clear social roles and cooperative behaviors. Their enhanced intelligence allowed them to engage with complex environmental challenges, while their restored emotional health enabled them to find satisfaction in pack achievements. Doctor returned to evaluate their progress, bringing representatives from other colonies that were dealing with similar enhancement disasters. The wolves had become a proof of concept for treating genetic modification trauma throughout human space. "You've accomplished something remarkable here," Doctor told as they watched the pack work together to solve a complex puzzle that tested both their individual intelligence and their cooperative abilities. "These techniques could help thousands of enhanced creatures who are suffering in facilities throughout the colonies." Looked over at Lyra, and who were supervising a training session where the wolves practiced using their enhanced senses to identify different chemical compounds. The princess and her companion had evolved from a simple reunion into a therapeutic team capable of addressing one of the galaxy's most pressing ethical challenges. The success with the wolves led to requests for similar interventions from across human space and former territory. Enhanced creatures who had been abandoned, mistreated, or improperly modified began arriving at the initiative's expanded facilities. Each case presented unique challenges, but the techniques developed through Lyra and's partnership proved remarkably adaptable. Realized that what had started as a single act of compassion during a war zone had grown into something approaching a new field of medicine. The initiative was pioneering techniques for healing the psychological wounds created by genetic enhancement, addressing problems that neither human nor science had previously understood. As he prepared his annual report for the Relations Council, reflected on how far they had all traveled from that moment when he decided to save an abandoned lion. Had found his princess, Lyra had found her calling, and had found a mission that combined his scientific training with his conviction that compassion should guide technological progress. The galaxy was still recovering from 3 years of war, but the initiative had proven that healing was possible when different species chose to work together rather than exploit each other. It was exactly the kind of hope that had discovered that day in the ruins of Nexus Prime, when he decided that saving one creature mattered more than winning a war.